So I think we need to know, when we jump into this bandwagon of increasingly heightened awareness of conservation, of architectural practices and offices, to also educate themselves about the manners of conservation as well. So I just touch upon, for a new project, architecture project, soil test and other things are not needed to be done, all the environmental factors needed to be done. For an old building, it's very important to have a very detailed understanding of the building itself. Yeah? And therefore, decide what is to be replaced and how much to be replaced. Until unless you don't know in that detail, I think you become very sweeping. Let's change this. Let's remove this, and so on. And in the process, you actually raise a lot of the significance of the building. So, 3 tenets. Minimal and essential. Now, how do you arrive at the essential? How do you arrive at the essential? Only when you know the building thoroughly. Compatibility and reversibility, which is often not fully possible, but I really like the idea, if you can bolt something to an old building, if that need arises, and if the future can do it better, we can unbolt them. So every conservation project has to have a conservation plan. And that is not something to be given overnight, right? And that is my observation in some of the architectural practice that goes on in this country. So this building, which is Babu invited me, I added another floor to that building, and we repurposed it for various activities. You know, Calcutta is a very inward-looking part in the north of traditional north neighborhoods of Calcutta. So that every building has a courtyard, and so in that courtyard there is a place for God, house God. So it was actually kept in the same way. It's spirituality. It was women's empowerment. So some rooms were actually given out for various classes, training programs of how to cook, because it was by Imami, an FMCG company, which used to be rented. And Imami felt that it is very important to train various kinds of occupational requirements of the modern day. So they started very creative classes, and they are also into the health sector, where everybody is in the health sector nowadays. So they made this space as a referral to some of their hospitals outside. And was education. Some of the other people from Rajasthan and Gujarat are very good in numbers. They're excellent chartered accountants. So they also have a program of chartered accountancy there. Yeah. So we worked through the restoration process, and these were the people who worked on this project, and we could manage to bring it back to its grandeur, to its utmost authenticity. Right? Going ahead, this is a little more initiative, you know. Up along the river is this from Calcutta and towards north. You've got multitude number of buildings, and we managed to restore a very, very old building, church, which was occupying a very prominent position in the town called Sayeed, and which was a Danish settlement. And we restored it exactly with all compatibility and all nuances that it takes to restore. There was no challenges as such. It was your technical knowledge of doing it, and as honestly, as authentically as possible. So we managed to do that, and we restored it to its glory. There was a discussion whether we will still retain the emblem insignia. So we could retain it, and this was restored. But it became a celebration for everyone. You know, this place was so integral to the community. There's a Muslim basti here. There's all kinds of communities with a lot of middle area, all the workers, and so on and so forth. So it became a public social space for the town in general. So we also got the UNESCO Distinction Award for this project. That is the material there. but it really encourages. This is last one, which is almost reconstructed from the rim. I call it a stitching exercise. We stitched brick by brick, and it was 1879, 1789, and this was the condition, and it went into a long redundancy, non-use, and so on. So we kind of surveyed. We even do a little bit of excavation because we were not having any plan. So we wanted to ascertain the walls, the position of the walls, and so we did that, and we kind of actions were based on the principles of authenticity to materials and methods of construction, not necessarily the material that was employed in the method of construction, because we did use steel for our support system, and so on. And it was more of a stitching exercise where the ethics of conservation, of technical remedial measures were guided by two principles, namely undertaking only the essential repairs and not overdoing it, because that seems to be a tendency of any restoration project, of a huge discussion of people who do not understand, as well as people who understand. About everybody seems to understand what is heritage and what constitutes heritage in the lighting, what constitutes heritage in the manner it has to be of the wallpaper and so on. So that seems to be quite a boring discussion occasionally, and we managed to kind of be away from that, and we kind of repaired and restored slowly by slowly, and we could actually get this building from here. As I said, we were using so this place, it was already having a floor, so we thought of not building the whole floor, so we created a vacuum and volume inside, like the coffee house in Calcutta, which is a very similar place. Please ignore the proportion, because I think our presenter couldn't work out with the proportion. 1786, so we could manage to, the huge number of people who could never imagine that this would be returned back to this state. They were very happy. They came in large numbers on the day of the inauguration, and that was by the side of the river. So I would like to conclude here by saying heritage, increasingly of course, but increasingly it has to be looked upon as an asset and not a liability. And it should be a major contribution. It can be a major contribution towards sustainability. It was a very, very, very key thing to talk about. And I have red marked while we are restoring, it's very important of promoting quality and excellence in design, and adaptive reuse and retrofitting exercises, which has to be done impeccably. Otherwise, I think we are missing the bus, and we can get a whole load of neighborhoods with fake heritage restoration. And the other points, like the government and the other, because as an architect, I always feel that this house and this panel may discuss, as we have a fantastic line of presenters, which will show their own presentation and the context in which they have been attending their projects. I hope that some highlights will be also coming forth, that as an architect, do we have an architectural social responsibility, right? And like the corporates have a corporate social responsibility, and how we can perhaps, we need not be an NGO, we need not be great lobbyists, but we should try to kind of influence our clients, who could be very much influential in their respective city or municipality or state, who could kind of lobby the regional authorities and bring home this idea that restoring old buildings, even if it is a ruin, could be sustainable and economic. Thank you. So I maintain that order. Aman is the pioneer, as we all know. I request Aman, Neemrana Hotel Group, co-founder with, I remember Francis Vaxia, yeah. So I request Aman to come on stage and deliver his presentation. Thank you.
Friends, I think 10 minutes is rather strict, but so it must be because we have so many people. So it works out in my case to 1 decade per 2 minutes. So I go really fast. And I will not talk as much as show you pictures. I think that might be self-explanatory. But what I'm talking about, I'd like to begin by saying, is not about there are many kinds of heritage. There's the Archaeological Survey of India, which looks after the Taj Mahal, the Red Fort and all that. And there are state archaeological buildings. So what we have touched are the drain inside the gutter, if you want to say, because this is building that nobody looked at. So when I got Neemrana in 1986, Francis was not part of it then. I had 2 Indian partners. Everybody said, "This, are you completely crazy?" So now if you look at pictures of it and you say, and you can have purist approach and so on, these are unlisted buildings. These are buildings that could have fallen and nobody would have noticed, or a developer could have wiped them. So, so we call our hotels non-hotels because none of the buildings that we restored were actually built to be hotels. They were built for warfare, they were built to keep people out, and now we are welcoming people in. So the way we work is that when we go to an area, let's say Neemrana, in 1986, India was another country. If you went to get electricity, they didn't even have a piece of paper in the department. They'd say, "Apna kagaz laiye or phir likhiye," So, and everybody thought I was an agent of Rajneesh who was going to do some smuggling or something, And there were articles in the paper, so there was a huge negative energy at that moment. So we use the people to restore, and India has the most brilliant people wherever you go, because we've done some 30 projects in 18 states, and I can't say that there's any state where people are not clever. There is, we're the world's only continuously alive civilization. And that's saying a lot. And if you look at Mesopotamia, Greek, Rome, Egypt, everything is risen and died. So we are going on and on forever. And therefore, in this short life, one has been able to restore the properties of the Chauhan, Jat, Sikhs, Marathas, Kumaonis, Garhwal. So there's so much to do. And the more you do in India, the less you've done, actually. So, if you saw this building, or if you passed it by, even today, I'm talking of many, many years ago, 30 years ago, if somebody looked at this, anybody in the government would say, knock it down and make whatever architects make these days, But the Chief Minister of Punjab once, Amrinder Singh ji, called me and said, "Come and tell RPWD people not to knock all the buildings that they are knocking, because what they're making is so ugly." So it is a lot more work, but it's so much more rewarding when this becomes this or that. Since the colors are very vibrant and sitting in the landscape, it's not so bright. The advantage of old properties is that they're the best sighted of all. If you want to live in Rashtrapati Bhavan because it's in Raisina Hill, we can't do that anymore. I actually wanted you to say, to whistle or something at 7 minutes so that, if you're keeping an eye on that. Yeah. So this is a Danish building too. A British building. This is a 700-year-old fort, not far from Jaipur. It's on the way back to Delhi. Sorry. And the same thing, when you wake it up, just showing you where that wall was and where another one is going to be. These are the staples, And I think that humans are now valued lower and like animals, so I think we can sleep in the stables. They do that in the Lambah Palace also. No? They've done all the buildings below and so on. But the idea was not to make it luxurious, luxury is a word. I have some problem with it in India because I think that we can't go on being Marie Antoinette, We can't just say, what is your image of yourself when you're sitting in a bathtub with rose petals or whatever the advertising people say, I mean, by the time people can afford to stay in hotels which are so expensive as they are, the lady, when she takes off her clothes and looks herself in the mirror, she wants to commit suicide. She's not that model that you're showing in the picture, So I think this whole fake thing about, you will become this, you will become that, I think let's be experiential, let's be real, If we get water on top of a hill, that's already an achievement. And if we got a great efficient tap to do it, it's all right. I mean, gold-plated one can stay. This is a dari floor I designed. I've done these in other places. So that in a hot place like Rajasthan, with 8 months it's warm, spreading out dari. You can even order them in the Bikaner jail. They used to make 60 feet wide daris. I went to see the loom. But if you make a dari like that and a dust storm comes, who is going to roll it, wash it, dry it, beat it? So I think, the whole thing is about putting. So within the fort or the edge of it or an extension of it, so this was the ruin of Neemrana, and it was selling for 1 lakh rupees for 40 years. So when I actually bought it for 3 lakhs or 4 lakhs, I don't remember, people said, are you crazy? Nowadays you go and they say a WC is for 4 lakh rupees, so which plays music and which does all kinds of things to you where you're only defecating actually. So I must be terribly old school. I'd rather re-buy Neemrana again than sit on one of those gorgeous WCs. So this is Neemrana today because it was in so many layers, but they had gone to sleep. So when you woke them, re-woke them, opened windows, did whatever you did, I think one of these seminars should really happen there because then you get to see that it's about experiencing the materials and everything is there. So being a continuously alive civilization, I think you know that in Calcutta and Abha, and when you work, if you work in Kerala, you get great people who work with wood. This was 10 minutes or 7? 7. Oh, 7. So this is the ramparts, There was a torture chamber where they used to tie people's feet and hang them down and question them from a window, and we made this into a chessboard for having tea. And that tower which is fitted there, because people said, we can't climb 14 levels, so a lift has been fitted into it. It doesn't really show. But Delhi's alternate archive, because it dates back to 1467, it's got the great architecture, the woodwork of Gujarat, Rajasthan. So even the materials that I used inside are recuperated materials. They're not, the destruction of Kerala was happening at the time and it was happening. So all those things were used here with a new eye. So from outside it is what it is, but inside there are pipes running here, there are girders, all kinds of strange walls. So you make a solid marble bed and people sleep on it and they don't know what was under it. Because basically you're paying for the experience. So it's not purist. I would call it restoration alone. I think you use many words, yes. Revitalization is a good word also to use, because you've actually changed the end use. This is the colonial part where we did some British and French rooms because the pillars outside are like the Connaught Place ones, the Doric pillars. This was a little staircase lying in Trivandrum under a tree from some demolished church. And so we had to turn a window into a door because the bathroom had to be outside the hall. So that was used. So I think one should also enjoy doing what you are doing. And when people enjoy Neemrana, it's about as much enjoyment in doing the place. A book came out saying 100 things you must do before you die. And Neemrana is in that, you know. So I thought that's crazy, you know. So there are the Ravalis, which are 2 billion years old, and which are fabulous, which are all over Neemrana, you know. So I did an Indo-Italian restaurant with 30 feet of these rocks, and it's absolutely amazing, you know. We learned from the Japanese. So I should just show you pictures. This was the archives in Patiala, you know, with white ants and all the doors blocked and 30-foot high ceilings. A Japanese came and said, you know, it could be 3-4 floors in Japan, you know. So, and we put high beds, so he said, how do we get on this? I said, you jump, you know. So then we've got steps now, you don't have to jump. Yeah, but if you see the height of the ceiling. So you go through all this, but you forget it. Like when you start making a building, you look at the foundation, you stand there in the dust, in the sun, but when the thing is ready, it's over with. This was the portico where the horse carriages used to arrive. So, I should say. Sorry?
2 more hours.
No.
Which means the house should be read as minutes.
Yes, I'll show you the pictures because we are speaking to an enlightened audience. They understand these things, you know. So in the middle of all these trees, you know, when you have ruins, and suddenly the ruins wake up. This is Gwalior. This is in Kumaon. So the idea is not to build, but there are old houses, there are ruins, somebody sold it, somebody doesn't come there. So you restore them in the way that you can restore them, and it is splendid. There are some very contemporary spaces within that. This is the last project which I've been busy with for the last 15 years. So this was actually something I went to the Rajasthan government, and Bhairav Singh Shekhar was the chief minister. It was 100 years ago, I think. And he said that they had no money to pay the officers. I said, why don't you tender these things? Why don't you do something with it? He said, acha, report likhi. So there was Colonel Ribeiro, and we went and did a whole report on the Nazul properties, and nothing happened, and then this is how I work actually, because I'm not an architect. So I can see how it happens. I make a photograph, I draw on it, and because, you know, the foundations are there, the building is there, you don't have to be so purist and so realistic. You create your axes, you do whatever, and eventually when it's built, it should look like it was always there. This is a kind of sunken pool because it's a lot of breeze, so that we should do this every year. It would be fun. It's not very far from here. There were roofless structures, you know. The camel lived here while we were doing the grinding of the thing, and this is his space. So there's lots to do, lots to show, lots more to do. But the only reason why I wouldn't do anything more, especially in Rajasthan, is because everybody is so busy obstructing your work, you know. They think you're going to restore this and when you die, run away with this, you know. So they make sure that you can't do anything. So you have to be stubborn, you have to be, I think you forgot to mention bribery actually. That's very essential. So if you don't bribe people, which we don't, I don't think I need to bribe India to restore its heritage. So you're troubled and troubled. And so it is, sorry, I think it is the end. No, so every room is done by an artist. This is Anjali Menon, and this is Amrita Shergill, and so on. So you really have to come and enjoy the space. Thank you.
Hi. So we were talking about adaptive reuse. I was trying to wrap my head around the concept of it. But to me, a lot of adaptation need not be at a building level. And it almost begins to, for me, it starts at a city or at a town or a neighborhood. And why can't we adapt spaces and start reclaiming those urban spaces for our own? My time doesn't start till my slide comes on. So 25 years ago, in Bombay, we got what is called the 95 Heritage Regulations for Greater Bombay, which was a pathbreaker in conservation, because until 1995, in India we only had one protection for heritage, which was the Archaeological Survey of India. So a city like Bombay, which mostly was colonial, most of the structures were less than 100 years old and not under any protection, were really up for grabs. And also add to it the highest real estate values and the fact that you had the lab conditions for decay. You had high humidity, the perfect temperature for fungal growth, heavy monsoons, and Bombay would not have survived as we know of it had we allowed that to happen. So in 1995, what the heritage regulations did was change the idea that we move out from the modern-centric focus to looking at our urban neighborhoods. And 25 years ago, I became part of this a citizens initiative called the Horniman Circle Association. What we did was to look at the whole area of Horniman Circle. This predates Connaught Place by 50 years as an urban design statement for business and for commercial activity. And we said, when we look at this space, why should we not take back from the idea of heritage and reposition heritage as a people's heritage, people's conservation, rather than this really ladies who do lunch or very elitist aspect of conservation. So we did a study of all the banks in the area, and we found that in a walking distance of 5 minutes, there were 33 banks. We went to the Reserve Bank of India and asked them to call these 33 banks for a meeting and said, could you do one thing, start something called a Banking District Association, and each bank give 1 lakh rupees. So we would have gotten 33 lakhs. And we said, when we're looking at a city, let's not say this is private, this is public, because at the end of the day, when Aman or Manish or any one of you are visiting Bombay, you're not going to say, अच्छा वो गिर रहा है तो गिर सकता है क्योंकि privately owned है, ये अच्छी दिखनी चाहिए building क्योंकि heritage है, और ये government की building है. So the idea of a city or a town, everything works, but that's your public realm. So why not look at these spaces? And we said, okay, let's do one thing. We will A, ask the banks, and secondly, we will do a fundraiser. So in the garden of this Horniman Circle, we had a little fundraiser, and Sharda Dwivedi, bullied Tarun Tailyani to gift a few objects which we put on auction. We had a sit-down dinner. In the good old days of 95, 96, we charged 2,000 rupees per diner, and we raised some money. But we only raised 6 lakh rupees. So what we did is, we picked the worst case situation, and this was a old rent tenanted building called Botawala building, which belonged to a trust. And obviously the trouble with rent controls in India affect every city. And there were offices inside, shops inside, but nobody was spending on what is the public face of the building. So we said, let's look at historic facades, because these are our city's visiting cards. These are our city's public face. And with 6 lakh rupees, we restored this building, which was just a very small intervention. We never got the rest of the 33 lakhs promised by the banks, but with 6 lakhs, we were able to demonstrate that you can clean up a facade. All you need is lime plaster, you need to remove the ficus growth, but most importantly, remove the signboards, because if you were paying for the facades, you told the tenants that, okay, we are bringing you your facade back, but please reorganize your signboards. And this is the simplest signage regulation we did. And then we realized later this was the first urban signage control in India. What it did is we didn't ask the government for 1 penny, and gradually Christian Louboutin, Hermes, they've all come in. One shoe costs 6 lakh rupees perhaps, but what it has done is recycled and readapted that urban space to become a city, to be taken back by the city. We did a similar exercise. I was a founder member of the Kalabhura Association. In 1998, we were 7 people. We got together, we were having tea at Mr. Sabawala's office, and he was the grandson of Sir Kawasji Jahangir, who had paid for the Elphinstone College, which is right there. And he said, I find it embarrassing when I walk past my grandfather's bust, because this area is dilapidated. After working hours, nobody's there, and there are drug peddlers sitting around. So we said, let's do one thing. We have so many art spaces. We have Jahangir Art Gallery, Prince of Wales Museum, NGMA. Let's again take this city's area and reappropriate. So recycle an urban space, which is that central triangular parking lot. We took the parking lot, turned it into the Kalaghoda festival, and we recycled every space in this area, from footpaths to back gardens to alleys, and turned it into a celebration of contemporary art. From 1998 to now, every year the Kalaghoda festival runs without charging a ticket. We've had Ustad Zakir Hussain perform free. We've had every great artist in India perform in the parking lot, open to public, no invitations, no passes required. And what we did with that is, over the years, this was Elphinstone College, we had 21 lakhs and we restored the biggest building which belonged to the government. We said we don't want the government to put money, we will restore it and give it back to the city, because again, this is we are reappropriating our public facade. In Bombay, we don't have space. We are not like Jaipur or Delhi, where there's a lot of large square foot flats and large bungalows. So we use every square inch of space. We reappropriated the steps of the town hall to have rock bands and performances at night, and at the daytime festivals for children. And what it did was to have the government and start thinking about this very thing that Manish said, is that heritage buildings could be assets and not liabilities. So what it did is, finally we got the Public Works Department to set up a trust for heritage, and that helped restore this public Ishatic libraries, one of the oldest public libraries in India, from this to this. We've now used it for public functions, for cultural activities, a lot more than just a library. Convocation Hall is another exercise. This is a Sir Gilbert Scott building, high Gothic, an amazing neo-Gothic structure. This was restored, and when we restored it, today we had Angela Merkel giving lectures here. It's been used for press meetings, it's been used for public lectures, performances, and again reappropriated by the city, because we don't have space, so we want to use every square inch. This is the Venice Biennale. And for the last few years, I've been trying to convince the Bombay Municipal Corporation that the last surviving industrial mill in Bombay is India United Mills 2 and 3. And what is happening here is that in the heart of Bombay, you have 8 hectares of space. And we could turn this into the best cultural space in the city. And this is a plan which I hope one day will happen, of reappropriating this oldest textile mill and turning it into something that's even better than the Venice Biennale. So this is still work in progress. I'm not promising anything. But the idea is that we can look at such spaces in the West. Why can't we do it in India? One such experiment was the Opera House. This was a cinema hall which stopped operating for 22 years, and it was privately owned. This was in such a bad state that the government actually said it was declared dilapidated and unsafe. And when Maharaja Sahib Gondal asked me to take on this project, I went to 6 structural engineers, the top 6 structural engineers of Bombay. Each one of them turned me down. So this was the strangest experience, when I would go and say, here, I've got this really exciting project, and they'd say, too much of a liability. Finally, I got Mr. Satish Dupelia, who used to walk in with his white safari suit and his cigarette, walk through the site and say, ye kholo, ye tod do, and with his 10th cigarette, he would exit the site. We managed this perfectly well, but it took us many, many years. And this is what the building looked like. The inside was a kind of an art deco, quasi, sort of neoclassical. We found old photographs, and the old photograph actually showed us that instead of this art deco interior, because it had been a cinema hall for so long, there were actually a neoclassical Baroque kind of a side balcony. So what we did for archival research is watch a lot of Hindi films. And we started looking at a lot of Hindi films, because right from the time of Prithviraj Kapoor, you had a lot of theatre and films being shot here. We finally came across one film in the late 60s, early 70s with Rajesh Khanna and Shashi Kapoor, the name escapes me, where the last scene where the fellow is coming to catch, the police officers coming to grab the criminal, the fellow is sitting on balcony, and it was a completely different balcony. So we ripped up the sides and we found the vestiges of this balcony. This is now from an opera house, it became a cinema hall for 22 years of absolute devastation. And when we put it back as an opera house, this was a very brave leap of faith, because when the owners asked me what should we do, I said let's turn this back into an opera house. We had no idea of economic feasibility, and they did take this on, but it's been running packed houses. It's difficult to get a booking at opera house, and now it's been 6 years. So this does work financially as well. These are some before and after pictures. Another one is an abandoned Kanyashala. This was a Marathi school for girls, and in Girgaon, people don't want to study in Marathi. So this finally, they came down to 8 students, and then they closed it up. This was what the inside looked like. We got a woman patron to turn this back into a women's college, a women art institute. So looking at repurposing cultural spaces, this is just a very small example of an unlisted building. It was up for demolition and in Calcutta. And finally we convinced the client that we could adaptively reuse this. This turned out, and what I hated about most such structures are these rolling shutters outside, because the original width of the doorway is wider than you put a rolling shutter. And if you look all around Girgaon, Kalba Devi, Gam Devi, you have these beautiful wooden folding doors. So we said, let's just bring back the wooden shutters. And what it did is, this was 2007, the best thing is that every building in Kalagura has copy-pasted this, so cafes, everybody's gotten rid of rolling shutters, from Sabyasachi to Abujani, Vinod Kumar, everybody's come into this place. So when we talk of gentrification, we tend to say, "Arey, this is so bad." I really feel in India we treat our heritage like, the old Leela Chitnis' mother. She's a widow, she's emaciated, malnourished in a white sari. But if we do something, we would rather let her die than do something about it. So we said, let's give a makeover to our mother. Now this is a small project we did way up in Himachal, Viceregal Lodge. We turned the old fire station into a little bookshop cafe, 2009. We turned in Jaipur, this was the pump house. This is the pumping station, waterworks, built during the Maharaja's time, and this was abandoned. So we turned this into the pump house cafe, little small intervention. Opera house, we then had a little wine cafe upstairs. We turned the garden into another garden cafe, and then created a jazz bar in the garage area. This is a small villa in Goa, which we turned into a homestay. These are some more pictures of this. In the tea estate in Munnar, we turned an old tea bungalow into a hotel. Very English and very sort of country English theme. This is a Jhalabar guest house. This was a dark bungalow which we turned into something that could generate revenue. Yes, museums, palaces, Chaumahala Palace, but again, because we're in Rajasthan, Bharatpur, it's a tiny little town it's sort of semi-rural. And this was Bharatpur Palace, which then became a museum. For Rajasthan government, we redid the museum. Today, it's better than an international quality museum. And because we lit it up and we said, Rajasthan mein itni garmi hoti hai, who wants to go out in 48 degrees to a museum? So let's extend the museum hours. We extended the museum hours to 9 p.m. So people can go there in the night and enjoy the light. In Patiala, Kila Mubarak, the main fortress, we first worked on the restoration, but now we're working with a hotel that becomes a museum hotel. We went halfway through on Vair, which is a bagichi. We restored this Jat bagichi to be used for a dark bangla. In Bikaner House in Delhi, we turned the bus adda into a cultural space. It's the most happening cultural art space, contemporary and yet showcasing Rajasthan's art craft. So we've used Araish, we've used inlay in a very contemporary medium, because this is Rajasthan's visiting card in Delhi. This is Araish and Tikri used in a very contemporary way. So really turning dead, decrepit structures into something alive. And I will end with this. We were consultants to Jaipur Metro, and when the underground metro work was happening, this was Choti Chopper, where the metro station was to happen. This is what it looked like any Sarkari roundabout with a pole that doesn't work. We found some old photographs and we saw this. So we said, what if there is actually the Kund surviving below this? We went back to Vasundhara Raje and we said, ma'am, if we find an archaeological excavation, we'll have to change the design of the station, so it'll cost us 6 months. She said, go ahead. We did an archaeological excavation, we found the kunds, we found the gaumukhs in marble that used to spout water. This was sent to Albert Hall, and we restored the thorn. We created an archaeological gallery below this, and then lit up the streets so that we can enjoy Jaipur by night. Thank you so much.
We now have Dr. Sayeed from Dharkar, Bangladesh. And we share a lot of similarities between Calcutta and Bangladesh. You both the flag and you're in Dhaka from Calcutta. So it's as close as that. Physically, mentally, and so many other ways.
Physically, mentally, and also as a mentorship also, you should say. Because I worked with Manish even in the, I started my conservation, one of my conservation was in 2008 or 9 with the support of Manish in Bangladesh, Manish Chakraborti. Actually, the premises of conservation is totally different from India to Bangladesh. Because in India, you have role model, you have expertise, fund, we have also fund. Fund is no problem, but the awareness we have a problem in Bangladesh. Because they don't realize, in our policymakers don't realize this is the heritage building. Because you know, all the heritage building in our country, the custodian is the archaeological department. This is the offshoot of Indian Archaeological Survey. They have their specific way to look into the building. And with the architect, the archaeologists, they have a specific way, traditional way to look into the heritage building. My job is, or my presentation is, how we will reimagine or how we will try to convince them, archaeologists or the archaeological department, this is adaptive reuse. But last 30 years, I am struggling only for identifying the heritage building and to show the government this is the risk, this is the threat for heritage. And the organizer invited me for tomorrow's session. It was comfortable for me because I am as an activist or I am trying to convince people. But just 2-3 days back, they requested me, no, I have to show some works also, or how I think about the adaptive reuse. That's why I would like to show something. What is the traditional way of looking at adaptive reuse by the government institute, and what is my vision. And this is the archaeology department of it. They have two ways of looking into works. Number one, they treat it as a monument actually. All this is the Buddhist monument Vihara. This is all constructed between the 6th to 11th century, and this is the religious structure built in Sultanate before Mughal, and this is our Renaissance of Bengal, the Buddhist and then Islamic, early Islamic architecture, not the Mughal. And all this building is under use. Everybody is using this as religious space. Even the temples, they are under use actually. They are using for their usual purpose. But we don't need any new adaptive reuse, insert new adaptive reuse. All this building is controlled by our archaeological department. And even the Mughal monuments is listed monuments, not 100%, 50% Mughal monuments is listed, and then 50% is not yet listed. Then what happens then? The population is increased, even the number of worshippers is increased. They need bigger space. They need bigger space for prayer. Then the first choice is to demolish the old mosque. This is the number one choice. And the second choice is they have respect to the heritage building, the local community, but surrounded by 5-story, 4-story buildings, so nobody can identify from outside that there was a heritage Mughal building. This is the second option. And the last option, our government department, they made, people want to have a prayer space. And the right side, you can see this is the original ruin, and they reconstructed with their own idea, or their own, it's reconstructed and dedicated and given to the public for prayer purpose, praying purpose. And there's another way. They preserve the old building, they don't demolish the old building, but surrounded by verandas and balconies and everything, so nobody can identify the original. And this client, they requested me, because as I did my PhD in mosque architecture, then everyone thought I can design good mosque in the Mercer. But this is not right actually. I am working on the heritage building also. Then I try to convince them, please, it's a beautiful Mughal building, why don't you preserve it? We can design a new building beside this or in front of this. Then they agreed, and we started to remove the verandas. And this is after restoration, and this is the other side. Just remove those verandas, and then we can see the original buildings. And one of our architects, I invited on a modern contemporary architect, Chakraborti, he designed the new mosque, the new spaces for the public, just behind the old mosque. It means the old and new have a dialogue actually. In between there is a plaza. The plaza can be used for the Eid prayer or bigger spaces actually. And this is how we look from the new building without the old. And this is another example. This building is awarded UNESCO this year. This is another example. This top is the original one. Originally it was a one single dome mosque. Due to the requirement, they extended to a two-dome mosque. And later they added one veranda. That is, each building has a story of different phases. Then I've restored this building, and this is the new. And the case is different. First one, our old one is in the front. Here is the old structure in the back. But in this building, I have a struggle with the client that this building I don't want to use as a prayer space. I want to dedicate for a Quran learning center or for Maktab. They have a big space for prayer. It is difficult to convince the local community that a mosque cannot be used as a prayer space. Then now it is used as a training center, Maktab Quran training center for the children actually. This is the new adaptive reuse for this mosque. And this is my premise actually. There is a history of Bangladesh, the building that built during the colonial period. I should not say colonial building. This is the building built during the period. It's a little bit different than India. We have seen a lot of big building, mega building. I can differentiate two types of building built during the colonial period. One is religious structure, one is residential building, one is secular public building. All public building have been except similar or follow the style of European any style, either Victorian or Baroque or Rococo, any style. But the residential building, when this was built for the colonial ruler, this building is again exactly similar with England or colonial country. But in Bengal, we have different type of residential building, which is not colonial, which is Bengali, built during the colonial period. Why it was happened? I will say in a small thing. During the colonial period, there is a rule was established. It is called permanent settlement. Permanent settlement means the British ruler, they settle the tax, permanent, fixed tax, amount of tax. Whole Bengal was divided into several territories with jamindaris, talukdaris, and each and every talukdar have to pay fixed amount of tax. It means, for example, 1 lakh rupee they have to pay the tax. And then that jamindar turned into a brutal jamindar, feudal lord. They want to earn more money. Each and every year they want more money. Within a short span of time, they became so rich, huge amount of money on their hand. Because they have to pay only 1 lakh rupee for the British government, and the rest 4 lakhs, 5 lakhs, each and every year they increase their income. And then they started their building there for their home. They have their Bengali wife, it means they have the Bengali culture. It might happen that they have their English educated or dress is British, but from inside they are Bengali people. It means their Jamindar building from outside looks British, but from inside all are Bengali with courtyard, orientation, north-south orientation, even the sunbreaker, everything was neat for the colonial, for a tropical country. And whole Bangladesh is dotted with several Jamindar palaces. So my work is, our goal is to preserve or give adaptive reuse. Only adaptive reuse, it is familiar to the government. This is museum. When they find a building, they have to install a museum. like this. There's no relation with this furniture, with that. There's another example of a museum. Then not only the museum, they can change only the museum. And there's another building. Recently we have restored. This is the first colonial building in Dhaka city. We did it together. And this is also turned into a museum. Diorama and that. So, even a Mughal building. This is one building, audience hall. Located in the Dhaka, this is a Lambah fort. This is the only fort we have in our Dhaka city. And this is the Darbar hall or audience hall of the city. They wanted to make it again a museum. What they did, the screen of all the first floor was a pavilion, the screen of the first floor to make the display. This is the carpet, this has nothing to do with the Mughals. To display the carpet, they close the first floor all with screen, cement screen. Then what I did, at first deplaster, because there is another tradition. All heritage building was plastered with cement. Then my first job is to deplaster. And then we have removed all the screens. Now it looks totally different. This is an ongoing project. We have to insert veranda even, and we want to display this building as a pavilion. And originally we can see this building is a Mughal building, but Chinese porcelain ceramics will be displayed there. It was displayed there. Then I would like to remove this and bring back original functions. And all internal. And this is interesting on hammam. This hammam was during the Pakistan where it was restored, and they opened up a lot of openings. Then what I did, close all the openings and open up the original well. And the lighting condition, it was before restoration, light comes from the window, and you can see the same lighting condition with only a punch from the top. And I've restored this thing. This is ongoing project. And this is another building. It belongs to our president in his own residence. And another museum, new type of museum after 50 years or so. Every government, every organization wants to have an independent museum or museum for liberation. And he wants to make a museum for independence and liberation work, then I have to follow it. And this is the one small residence. Every village has such kind of tiny residences. It's a very broken, and after restoration, the family now own it and they can celebrate. It was the before and then after. And this building they want to use as a weekend house. Now this family is a bigger family, 4 or 5 families, and I dedicated one room from each family. They bring their own furniture, and that is there. And the last one is this building I have restored. Okay, first. This is a very big building. This building has 3 chronological, and the yellow one is a very old one. Before 1550, and the left side, it was used for the red one is the very old part, and the new part is the colonial part is the white one. And this is the old. I want to retain all the old elements as for display for architectural students or for architecture, the construction system. Even you can see the beautiful construction system made of brick. And really thinking, because they want to make a museum. This building was left unused for last 5 years, 4 years, because their sponsor want to have an institute for conservation craftsmen, to train the craftsmen. Our government did not agree. They pressed me to make a museum. Then, okay, I accepted. But I want to make a new museum for the craft process, not for the display of the. I've identified the type of crafts and want to display the process. Okay. I want to display the process, not the product. But product I have to show, not as an artifact, but is an installation. That these are the types of artifacts we have, products, and this is the process. Then I want to display all the process. Even the section, how the form, how the shape comes. This is metal work. and the process of the metal ore I want to display in the museum. So the people have a knowledge, I can transfer the knowledge to the next generation. And this is the installation with all the metal things. And even the process of the carpentry, woodworks, all the joinery, even in the left side, we want to show how the original plant was, and after doing the craftsman, how it was. And these are some examples for installation. Thank you all.
That's just fascinating. The gamut of work that extends. You know, one of the big problem I really envy Bombay's buildings, because Bombay has got this stone structure, unlike in other parts like Calcutta or Dharkar, which has got more bricks, and its impact on the physiographic impact, the climatic impact are completely different. And Bombay's buildings are much more durable, therefore. And buildings on the side of the river, to provide very high water table, often do not. Now, I'm really looking forward to the presentation from Amar Vinod Kumar, and over to Vinod.
Thank you, Rajasthan Architecture Festival, for inviting me, and it's great to be here. So we are talking of readaptive future. I think we also, as architects, need to talk about how much harm architects are doing, because 40% of whatever climate change is because of construction, and a lot of materials we use, I think concrete, steel, they are not that carbon friendly. So I think we need to re-adapt ourselves, the way we work, and that's very important. And perhaps in a country like India, the amount of conservation architects working is far, far less. We've got the elite people here, but yes, I think there could be 100 times more work and people working on conservation projects, and there are projects all over, but I think we have dearth of people doing work. And I don't think money is also a problem. We have money and work, but there could be much more people doing work. And we work from Thrissur, which is a town in Kerala, also known as the cultural capital of Kerala. And you might have seen the Puram festival with a lot of elephants that happens in our town. And let's go to the next slide. And here, just a slide showing city as a material bank. It's not just for a city, it can be any village or even households in Kerala earlier. All the materials used to come from the household or the compound. We used to take laterite from there, build from there, and then we used to have local workers. So even if it's a very small village, everything used to be within the city or the village. I think that's something which we don't have much today, because I would say it's easier to get a multinational product than a local indigenous person coming to us. It's also because maybe for the indigenous or the local, we don't have that kind of a marketing or the organized network which most global corporations have. So I think that's again an area where we architects need to put in effort, try to bring up the local people, the craftsmen and all the others who work with us. And this is just, okay, some of these things which other speakers have also spoke about. Okay, when we use, what are the technologies available, how easy is it to get, and is it organized to really do such things? I think these are things which we need to work out. And this is our office in Trichy. It's called DD Architects, and for the past 20 years we've been redoing, adding spaces, trying out, exploring things, exploring materials, lime, oxide, wood, bamboo, all these materials, and I think that's the biggest laboratory for us. It's not a huge office, but we've been exploring every material, every craftsman, and that's where we learn from, and we try to implement many of that in our projects. These are some of the interior spaces. So we've used everything around. We used mud from the compound, we used wood in the old structure. It was a 1920 old wooden a hut, or just like a backdrop, a small wood hut, which we have changed and reworked it. Sorry, I don't have the old photo, we're trying to search for it. And so we just use the same space, same walls, and then rework the whole thing to bring something new. And all these materials are there: lime, terracotta, mud, bamboo, wood. It's all mostly original materials. And this is one of our earliest projects, work from 2003 to 2005. It's the old palace in Thrissur. It's called Shaktantambaran Palace. Shaktantambaran is the founder of Thrissur. He's a very bold ruler from 1790 to 1805 was his time. And this palace was on a court case, and the family didn't want to leave it, and finally government took over the palace in around 1990s. And then archaeological department was confused what to do, and finally we gave a proposal to have a heritage garden in the whole compound. It was a king's palace, not in a great shape, and even the palace is converted to a museum. So these are some of the old and new images. This is the old space where literally they were confused what to do, and it's a very important project for us because if you see the whole compound, within the 3 years we've added around 500 trees, and the concept was to have a forest within the city, and the entire space has changed, and we've restored the entire compound, and we can do heritage walks there. There is a bamboo, there's an archaeological garden, whole lot of things happening there. So it's in the center of the city, a 6-acre, 8-acre compound, otherwise which could have easily gone to any developer, or it could have been something else. So it was somehow the people came together, we could do it that time. And this is something very next to the palace. It's a pond. Kerala, you all might have seen the old ponds where people take bath and village ponds. So, but in a city that doesn't happen anymore because people all take bath in their houses. So going to a public pond and taking bath doesn't happen. So in the last 40-50 years, it was in a very bad shape. So it's just next to the palace. And then in 2007, just after the palace project, that was the shape when we got in there. It was all filled and in a bad shape. So then we could restore it into an urban edge park, water edge park, where people can come spend their evenings. There are a lot of birds coming there. There are migratory birds. So we gave a new meaning to the traditional space, using local materials, using local labors, and that's how we work there. And this is again a similar project, which is the old waterway of Thrissur called Vanjikulam, from which we had boats going to Kochi, Trivandrum, and all these places. And in the last 60 years, just like the pond, people stopped using boats for this transportation. Since the trains came, the lorries came, so boats stopped happening. Although Kerala has a fantastic network of water channels, mostly built during the British colonial times, now government is doing projects to revive them. So this is part of that project also. So it's in the town. We're trying to restore the whole thing into an urban space. So it's happening now, it's ongoing, with also some support from the tourism and the corporation, where we are reviving the entire space and giving a new urban meaning also, so that it becomes a new urban center within the city. Keeping the old things where maybe it's not used for transportation anymore, it could be used for tourists, and it can have other purposes also. And this is one project where we have the heritage guest house of Thrissur. It's called Ramanilayam, and it's a very prestigious space within Kerala. Ramanilayam is one of the best guest houses owned by the tourism department. And a lot of leaders, prime ministers, presidents have stayed here. But for the past 10-15 years, it was, I would say, badly managed or not well managed by the department or the government. And then it was in a bad shape. So we had to restore it, document it, do it piece by piece. And it's done with the help of PWD engineers and local contractors. So we are proud of it. So without any external help, with the local people, we could get it done. And this is during the work, and it's after it got done, some of the corridors. And although it's a PWD work, I can surely say, maybe to Neemrana, sir, that it's possibly as good as any modern heritage hotel. Yeah. So, and we are very proud that it's done purely with government work, by government engineers and PWD staff, and we could achieve something. And And about this place, you can see before we did it, they had put vinyl flooring over timber and gypsum roof below the original timber roof. There's a whole lot of work which we had to do and bring it back to this kind of shape. And this is one house we had done for a friend, photographer friend, for 10 lakhs, using all recycled materials. We had materials from an old factory, tile factory, and so the bricks and the roof tiles, the oxide flooring, everything we've used with local materials, recycled materials, and it's 1,000 square feet structure for a friend within 10 lakhs. So again, these things are possible today, but means a lot of work from architect's side, each day at the site and this side. And this is some of the interior photographs. And again, windows which are recycled, old windows, we had to go to the wooden dealers, antique dealers, get the thing and rework on it. It's again a lot of work, but it gives the results. And that's his father sitting there. And this is our own home, where this is the old and this is the new. And this again, it needs a lot of work, but piece by piece we could restore it. And again, using all the old materials, all the old craftsmanship, and whatever wood you can see as screen there, it's all from the old wooden beams on top. So we could bring it back to a new life could be given to it, and intact Trishul right now works on top there near on the top floor. We could add a studio, all these things. And this is one of the projects which we've been working for the past 15 years. It's a temple restoration project in Trishul. And it's one of the largest temples in Kerala. It's in the center of the town. And right now we are also working on the Maidan, which is around the temple. The project hasn't been started, or we haven't got funds yet, but we hope to get it sometime. And we've been working on it, and this is the different stages of conservation that have been happening. And for a temple like this, which is more than 1,000 years old, the restoration is something which happens every 100 years. Like, it's called Punarudharanam in Kerala. So every 100 years they add new energy, new meaning, not new spaces essentially, but the meaning of the space change. And there's a lot of new things which come up. So I think that's very important for a 1,000-year-old plus temple every 100 years. So we could get from whatever clues we got that the last restoration, major restoration, happened in 1880s or 1890s. So when we did it now, perhaps it stays for another 100 years. We hope so, if things are not damaged. And so even for the Maidan, that whole thing is 65 acres. And we've done the tree mapping, and we are working what to do with the water, so that we have something very sustainable for the future. Water, waste, all these things, you know. And I think that way, every space needs to relive. Maybe not in the old way, but we have to give life to all the spaces, even ourselves, everything, institutes. It needs to be given fresh life. And I think in that, architects have a big role to play. And with these words, I think this is the last slide. Yeah. What I would say is nature around us displays its anxieties in form of climate change and ecological damages, which happens every day. In Kerala, usually the rain starts in June 1st, which is very accurate every year. But this year it started right now, 15th it started. So everyone is affected. Architects, farmers, festivals, everything is affected. So that's something which is, we have to realize it's a reality. And ecological damage. It's important for humans to be sensitive to their surrounding and learn to live, respecting the unique landscape and biodiversity surround. And I think conservation has a big role to play in the whole thing. Thank you all.
We now have opened any questions on all of the speakers from the audience, so that we can bring in some kind of a more clarity on some of the issues. And we request all the speakers to come on stage. There's about 15 minutes. I see so many of you all still, and I'm really looking forward keynote speak by on MEP in heritage buildings, which I think is a continuity. Yeah, which I think is a continuity after this session. So we have got about 15-20 minutes, and I will sit somewhere inside the Abha. And we take the questions primarily directed to all the 4 speakers.
I live in Jaipur, and I think each speaker has...
Do you have a mic? Can you?
No. Anyway, please speak loud enough.
No, the mic is ahead.
Mic here as well.
I think it's working.
Yeah. Does this work?
Hello?
This works. This works.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello? Yeah. So I live in Jaipur, and I think each one of you have been brilliant. And I think everything I've heard is very close to my heart, and I grew up in Bombay, so my God, Abha, many congratulations. And I know what's been going on in Bombay, but unfortunately, though I have a lot of friends part of your Kala Ghoda, like Kaini and Linda, I know a lot, but great work. And Aman is a friend and fantastic, and each one of you. But why can't we have, since all of you are doing such great work in each city, and you're quite influential and very well respected in your cities and in the country, try and get a policy in place with the government of India. I think that is most important, that every city or every state should not, no building should be destroyed. I know how many have been destroyed in our own city, and it breaks my heart. And in fact, with the ministers who are very much worked with the heritage, I would like to name anybody, but it all comes to, and I don't understand how they can't be convinced that we are not going to be live forever, but the city is going to live forever.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Does it work here?
Hello?
Thank you. I just wanted to say one thing. We need to start with the fact that even in cities and states, many don't have urban policies. We still have only monument protection policies. Rajasthan till very recently did not have a town and country planning act on which to enable things like conserving Shekhawati and such areas. So we don't think in terms of an urban neighborhood. And secondly, in terms of percentages, you know that Rajasthan government has a cap of 2% for any architectural work. Now why on earth, if you pay monkey, you will get peanuts, and that's the beginning of the whole mess.
But I think that's where you all need to kind of... I think we all need
More questions, please. I think we've got so many other questions. Go ahead. Yeah?
Well, it was very good to see that it was not Shah Jahan's Taj Mahal being rejected, but I think common man's Taj Mahal everybody looked at. I was only wondering, with such kind of an effort, 2 options have come out. One is a step-by-step documentation about the techniques of restoring and stuff like that from diverse contexts, and can be shared with the fraternity. And the other one being sort of a similar thing, but guideline or training for the artisans, because that's something as is fully part of the heritage that we need, so that it's a spin-off that goes on with or without us larger publics.
Yeah. Any specific questions? Yes.
I think Mr. Sayeed pointed out that most of the imagination of restoring old buildings is usually, my voice is very low, and the only imagination is converted to a museum. Right? And whereas Aman pointed out that, Aman shows that can be, now I come from Bangalore, and I've been pushing for a project like what Abha has been talking about. I wrote the Heritage Act for the city, I put it into the legislature, nothing happened, 20 years, I've been struggling, and finally I said there's no point running after an act. There is one road in my city which has 36 heritage buildings of more than 100 years old. And 80% of them belong to government. Now, one of the things maybe this panel can tell us is what else to do other than museums? What else? I mean, they will not give it to a hotel.
You can't change the aspirations of it. You know, people want to live like.
Yeah, but we don't want 36 museums either.
I know, we did Villa Poti Party
Yeah, I know
in
that.
Malleshwaram, but eventually it went, you know, because 90 crores you get for selling your plot. Well, you're never going to get 90 crores from an 8-room hotel, you know.
I understand.
No, but I think the basic problem which we cannot fight is the aspirations of the people. Look how the rich in India want to live. The houses look like London and Paris and Rome. Why are we having Beverly Hills in Delhi? Hello.
No, but that's not the point. I'm saying all 36 buildings belong to the government of India, government of Karnataka. I'm saying that maybe if you could share what else to do with it. I mean,
Retail. We have Zara in a heritage building, there's gallery Lambah.
what else you want? In 36 units.
Restaurants, retail, bookstores, cafes.
Why don't you make it a project?
How can you make the heritage a public movement rather than, you know, let to through institutional or other thing? I think it's better to take heritage back to the people and let people come as a partner. So in fact, you know, it's becoming either a government agenda or, you know, few kind of enlightened institutions. But it has never been a public agenda. So I think it has to be public-led and where, you know, what are the options available for making it as a public-led movement. You know. That's what it is.
Same question.
And
I converted one building
one
into
thing
the...
I would like to add, you know, we talk about the heritage. I don't think about 90 to 95% of the heritage is identified. Unfortunately, it's because of few people, you know, that we are getting, you know what heritage is. But otherwise, in case of heritage in education, you know, even in architecture education, this remains an, you know, peripheral subject. Why can't heritage be taught as an integral part of the education? So that all professionals get involved in it to job you. That's what we do.
Yeah, I think that's very valid. And can I take your question? Can you ask your question?
Yeah, I'm Mittal. I'm from Lucknow. Recently, just last 15 days back, we have submitted our city development plan to the capital city of Lucknow, and this was a very major part of this thing, heritage. So the way we have done, if the same thing can be taken care for other cities, like this chapter of heritage and tourism as a complete chapter has been submitted, where we have taken all the buildings of the city under the development for the city users in a different manner, maybe from the museum to everything, and everything is getting underutilized, like utilization from the underutilized places. So if the same thing can be taken to the other places or cities, then that can be.
What I like to add, you know, right from 1970, I'm in the planning profession right from 1969, you know, is not partnership. But let me tell you, master plans have not addressed the issue.
Yes.
Yes,
I completely agree.
You know, this is what.
Yeah, we will continue this discussion because
I have done about 8
been
master
going on
plans.
since last month.
Why can't have each master plan dedicated chapter to,
Yeah.
you know, heritage?
True.
And unfortunately, whatever the heritage has been done,
Yeah.
is
So your point is
defined.
well taken.
It's
We will-
only
yeah.
one thing
Yeah.
that topic, the chapter is done by people who are, you know, don't understand the
Yes,
heritage.
yes,
That's what
yes. Any other question? Lots. Can all the questions be kind of shooted very quickly?
Hello. I hail from Jaipur itself. I had a question that there is a small town known as Rajgarh just before entering Alwar. One of the projects was shown near Alwar. So I wanted to ask, there are many ruined structures, old heritage structures, which are not being restored or, you know, not being taken into consideration.
Question.
So I wanted to ask this, in Jaipur we are restoring and making reuse of old buildings again and again, putting work and efforts in those buildings which are already been restored quite enough times. So how do you get people to notice old structures, because there are many...
How do you get people, right? Any question, then you know?
I have a question.
1, 2, 3.
We have seen many buildings beautifully restored. question because since it is claimed back by the city, so this also needs to be very inclusive from the perspective of all users using it. So how do you deal with issue of access to the disabled people with disability? Did you consider that?
Right. Yes. Quick one.
So there are a lot of Havelis in Jaipur. Partly, old built to 1800s and 1700s, and now over time they've been built on top since 1980s, 1960s in concrete. So how does one approach, doing restoration of this kind of project? Do we only restore the part that was, old in heritage, or do we also take the same aesthetic and put it on the part that was built in the modern era?
Right.
So there's something that I would like to know.
Right.
Depend what the end user says.
Right. Any more? Yes. Would you take on one by one?
Answering your question, depends what the end use is. You can't just be purist and knock down everything that's been added. But if it can be made harmonious and it works, it's okay. It's intuitive also. You can't have a hard and bound rule for that. But if you're turning it into a purist building, then you have to knock all the additions. Otherwise, you would.
Would you like to add? Because I think one has to make a judicious trade-off between while removing the later addition. If you are in the process losing the significance with which you have started the building, right? You have to make that trade-off sometime, right? And you have to bank on some of the very established rules and principles of conservation. And that is what I feel is very important, because there are lots of architectural firms which are doing restoration in this country today, or from all over the world. And I was horrified to see a restoration in the name of restoration as well, where artifacts are used as displays, right? Including the Reichstag Museum, where Norman Foster has used as a display in front of the lift lobby, right? I think that is very important for doing that trade-off and giving respect to the significance for the building that you are attending to, right? You're not compromising. If you're compromising significance, you're actually pushing the building towards a fakeness, right? So that is very, very critical. And here, I would like to ask very celebrated who only does architecture, and architecture is always about creativity, and conservation is not so creative. Would you have some answers to that? I mean, can we discuss that as well? Because essentially it's an architectural crowd that we are gathered here today, and I don't want to really get into the deep understanding which will be addressed in the MEP session, I'm sure, which is coming in the next session. But does architect Abasu really think conservation is creative?
Thank you all for your presentations. I think within 40 minutes we've seen more than, it should be a seminar by itself. I really feel that there's so much work that has been done by all of you, so really thank you. And I would like the site to arrange that we get them all to Dhaka in Bangladesh and have really a good seminar where we learn also the way this can be done, because I know that we really immensely need this awareness. I think it's a very interesting debate that you bring up. So I feel, we've also addressed some of these buildings where it may not be of high value in terms of preservation. So I think there is a category in many ways, like the buildings, also the one that you're addressing, how much historical value it is in terms of architectural and craftsman-wise, and also historical values. So all these different values, if you go through the entire spectrum, and then you can decide which needs to be preserved as like a museum, or which can be used as an adaptive reuse, repurposing, giving it a second life or third life, and how far. I think that balance needs to be decided based on the building and the entire history of the building, of its construction, its use, everything. So we have addressed a few buildings where we also had to do some addition and connectivity. So in many ways, we've also added, with the old building, a new sort of plug-in to bring a new value, or let's say, to kind of bring a repurposed ideology, or even, I would say, give a new life to it, a second life in a way.
Actually work exactly in that field. I feel that the question is very interesting. But then, if you were to make a Taj Mahal into a hotel, it would be a sin.
Yes.
But if you look at Neemrana, it was such a ruin. So you can't say we restored it. You have to go out and walk, 500 meters and sit on the rampart in the hole where the soldiers did. So if you're making bathrooms and everything and all this, so it is restoration for reuse. It has to be creative. It has to be jugaad, as we say, and inventive. But then, when you look at the old parts, we've done in windows with glass and views. So we addressed that problem. In Rajasthan, we have 3 layers of windows. Outside there's an old wooden window, as there would have been, and inside the depth of the wall there's a window which is a glass, which is a gauze window, and there are shutters of glass. So if you want breeze, then you open the first window, then you open the second window. So it has to be creative, otherwise you can't live there.
Yeah, so I think it's also a decision by the architect who's working on it. I just have one question before I end this, that what do we do about the modern heritage? We talked about a lot of other things, but what about the modern heritage that we have? And in Bangladesh, I know that we've had lots of issues, a lot of buildings which constantly were, it has to be taken down, made it a 20-story building and all that. And we go to the streets and, like activists, but why should that be the case?
So I think, Marina, that's such a valid, and I think especially in an architecture festival, if you look at 1935, Siam was set up with Charles, Corbusier as one of the members, and that sort of led the way for the conservation charters. But the question is, what happens to 20th century heritage today, and how do we make sure we're able to protect it? I prepared the management plan for Corbusier's Chandigarh Capitol Complex, and yet when the management plan went into operationalization, I had to fight with the CPWD engineers saying, you've got to change the air conditioning system, not to cut the tapestries of Corbusier. And the fellow said, no, we just put money last year in doing the new AC system, so we won't do it. My point being, the concept of 20th century architecture is being imported has still not come down even at a World Heritage Site level. So maybe one of the reasons I worked on nominating the Art Deco buildings of Mumbai to UNESCO was, had we not done it as a UNESCO site, in the real estate scenario, these would have all gone. They were not individually listed. So we're currently working with Sri Lanka to create a nomination dossier for Jeffrey Baba's, his legacy. I think Bangladesh needs to do the same with your modern heritage, and especially in South Asia, where we have such an intense urban implosion, really. I think it becomes really, really critical for India, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh to really come up with maybe a kind of a 20th century platform where we can begin to have a dialogue on this.
So I think
I would like to share one good news with Marina Tabassu regarding the modern heritage. Last 1.5 years, tried a lot to include 2 buildings in World Heritage List from Bangladesh. One is Parliament building, one is the MODERATOR's building. Fortunately, these 2 buildings is listed as a tentative list in the World Heritage List. It's a good advancement for our country. Now we have to prepare the dossier for the second layer.
I think we have to close it down, and there are so many other people I can see who can go on discussing so many. As Tabassum said, was perhaps separate seminar, CKT and Jaipur. So thank you. Thank you. It will be a lunchtime morning.
Requesting the speakers to please be seated.
Okay, so we all come. So I declare this section closed. Yeah.
I request Architect Vinod Kumar to please come to the stage to felicitate Architect Manish and Architect Abha.
So it's not closed yet.